my name is Mark Thompson, I'm 50 years old, and this is the story of how my own son called me embarrassing in front of his friends and how a stranger revealed the truth he never knew. If you enjoy real-life stories like mine, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. I've always been a simple man, not simple-minded, just simple in the way I lived. I worked hard, came home tired, packed lunches, paid bills, fixed what broke, and did my best to raise a good kid after the divorce. I never cared for fancy things. I didn't have the money for them anyway. My ex-wife Lisa once said, my ambition matched my paycheck, which was her poetic way of telling me I wasn't enough. Ethan grew up hearing comments like that, even if she didn't say them directly to him. That's the thing about words spoken around a child, they settle, they root, they grow into something sharp. The moment everything began to unravel happened on a cold Thursday evening in early November. Ethan had asked if I could pick him up after basketball practice because his stepfather Brad was busy with a work dinner. I didn't mind. I never minded. Any chance to spend time with my son felt like a gift these days. Traffic was slow, the sky already turning, that bruised purple shade it gets when winter is deciding whether to show up early. I parked my old silver Honda car that had survived more repairs than I cared to remember in the far corner of the parking lot. I didn't want to embarrass him by parking right up front. I knew how teenagers were. I walked toward the gym doors just as Ethan and his group of friends came out. They were laughing about something. Basketball bags slung over their shoulders. Tall, confident, loud. Ethan saw me before I reached them, but he didn't wave, didn't smile. He stiffened. One of the boys nudged him. That your dad? Ethan swallowed. Yeah, that's him. Another boy snickered. Dude, he still drives that thing. My mom had one like that in 2009. The group laughed. Ethan didn't. He stepped away from them and muttered something I couldn't catch. When I got close enough, I said, "Hey bud, ready to go?" And that's when he said it. Loud enough for them, quiet enough that he thought it would hurt less. "Dad, can you not talk so loud? You're embarrassing me." It wasn't the words, it was the tone. The dismissive flick of his hand, the way he looked through me, not at me. His friends tried to hide their smirks. One didn't bother trying. My mouth went dry. I felt something twist deep inside my chest, not anger. Not yet. Just a sharp, hollow ache. I'd given this kid everything I had. Every overtime hour, every missed meal, every dream I'd postponed. And somehow, I'd still become the punchline. I forced a small smile. "Sure, let's go." He walked ahead of me, not beside me. He got in the passenger seat but kept his eyes glued to his phone the entire drive. Silence filled the air like fog. Heavy, thick, unspoken. Halfway home, I asked, "Ethan, did I do something?" He sighed, annoyed. "Dad, can we not do this right now?" "Seriously." I nodded, staring at the road even as it blurred. "Okay?" He didn't know it then, but that moment would define everything that followed. When we got home, he headed straight for his room. I stayed in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, trying to steady the tremble in my hands. My sister Liv called around 7, checking in like she always did. She heard something in my voice and pressed until I told her what happened. She exhaled sharply. "Mark, this isn't just teenage attitude. This is how kids talk when they've been fed the wrong story about their parent." "Lisa," I asked quietly, "who else?" I wanted to say she was wrong, that Lisa wouldn't talk badly about me, but she had before, and I'd forgiven it before, maybe too many times. That night changed everything. Around 10, I heard Ethan's door open. His footsteps came down the hall. For a second, hope flickered maybe he'd apologize. Maybe he'd realized how deeply it cut. Instead, he grabbed a soda from the fridge and said, without looking at me, "Brad is taking me to tour colleges this weekend. He says he wants me to see what real success looks like." I felt those words like a slap. "Ethan, I want you to have success too." He shrugged. "Yeah, but you don't really get that world, Dad. That world," as if success was a country I needed a passport to enter. He went back to his room, leaving me standing in the quiet kitchen. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked, and all I could think was that somewhere between his childhood and this moment, my son had rewritten who I was. What I didn't know was that help was already on its way. Someone who knew the truth about me. Someone Ethan never expected to meet. And she was about to change everything. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. I didn't sleep much anyway. My mind kept replaying Ethan's voice, the way his friends laughed, the way he couldn't even look at me in the car. I kept telling myself it was normal teenage stuff, but deep down, something felt different, colder, sharper, almost rehearsed, like he'd been practicing that distance. I drove to work in silence, the radio off, winter frost still clinging to the edges of my windshield. The hospital parking lot was already half full. I'd been a maintenance supervisor there for almost 20 years. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept the lights on, and for a long time, it kept my son fed, safe, and smiling. When I walked through those doors, people nodded at me with familiarity and respect. It was the one place where I never felt small. Around mid-morning, I was fixing a flickering hallway light when I heard footsteps behind me. Mark, a familiar voice called. I turned to see Dr. Nadia Patel, the hospital's chief administrator. Calm, steady, respected by everyone. She always greeted me like an equal, something I quietly appreciated. "You're in early," she said with a small smile. "Couldn't sleep." She studied my face for a few seconds. "Everything all right?" I hesitated. I wasn't the type to talk about my personal life at work. But something in her expressions, something understanding, made me lower my guard just a little. "Just stuff with my son," I said, teenage attitude. Her eyes softened. "Those years can be rough. But you're a good father, Mark. I see the way you talk about him. And I've seen how many shifts you've picked up over the years to give him what he needed." I blinked, taken aback. "You noticed that?" "Of course." She folded her hands. "You were the one who volunteered overtime during Christmas 3 years in a row so Ethan could have his plane tickets for his school trips. You're the one who stayed after hours during the storm to fix the generator so the pediatric floor didn't lose heat. I notice everything." I didn't know what to say. Compliments weren't something I was used to. Before I could respond, my radio crackled, calling me to another wing. I excused myself and went back to work, but her words stayed with me. Someone notices. Someone sees. I didn't realize how much I needed that reminder. When I got home that evening, Ethan was already in the living room, eating pizza with Brad. The man had a talent for filling a room with his presence, even when he wasn't saying anything. He glanced at me with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Mark," he said, wiping his hands, "I hope you don't mind. I picked up dinner and thought Ethan and I could go over some college options. Big decisions ahead." I nodded slowly. "I don't mind dinner, but college decisions. That should be a conversation we all have." He chuckled, the kind of chuckle people use when they think they're being patient with someone slower than them. Of course, I'm just guiding him, helping him learn to think bigger." Ethan glanced at Brad, then at me. "We're just talking, Dad." But the way he said Dad felt like an obligation, not a connection. I took a seat across from them. "Ethan, I want to be involved. I've been saving for years." Brad cut in smoothly. "We know, Mark. And that's admirable, really. But some of these schools require the kind of financial planning you might not be familiar with." The words hit harder than he probably expected. Maybe exactly as hard as he intended. I inhaled slowly. "Ethan, can we talk alone for a second?" He exchanged a look with Brad, then got up reluctantly. We stepped into the hallway. He crossed his arms, staring at the floor. "What's going on?" I asked gently. "You've been distant, you barely talked to me. And yesterday, what you said hurt." He shifted his weight. "I didn't mean it like that." "Then how did you mean it?" He didn't answer. He just exhaled dramatically, the way teens do when they want the conversation to be over before it starts. "Ethan," I tried again, "I'm proud of you. I always have been. But I feel like you're ashamed of me." His jaw tightened. "I'm not ashamed. I just, Brad knows about college stuff, business stuff, money. He understands the world I want to be part of, and I don't. You've worked the same job forever. You still drive that old car. You don't." He stopped himself, but the damage was already done. "I don't fit the image," I finished. He looked away. That silence cut deeper than the words. Footsteps approached, and Brad reappeared, all polished concern. "Everything all right here?" Ethan muttered. "We're fine," and brushed past me back into the living room. Brad placed a hand on my shoulder light, but not gentle. "Mark, teenagers need role models who show them possibility. That's all I'm trying to offer." I stepped back from his touch. "And I'm his father." He smiled thinly. "Of course," but in his eyes, I saw it something I'd been blind to for years. He didn't want to guide my son. He wanted to replace me. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table, my hands curled around a mug of coffee that had gone cold. The house felt too quiet, too empty, too unfamiliar. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost my son's respect. But the truth he needed to hear was about to walk into our lives. And she would not whisper it. She would shatter the silence. 2 days later, the weather turned icy, the kind of cold that slipped under doors and settled into the bones of the house. Ethan was packing for his weekend college tour with Brad, moving in and out of his room with a seriousness that made the tension between us feel even heavier. Every time he walked by, I tried to start a conversation. Every time, he nodded without really looking at me. By Friday evening, I felt like I was watching my son drift further away in real time. Around 6, Liv called. My sister always knew when I needed grounding. "How bad is it?" she asked, skipping any attempt at small talk. "Bad," I admitted. He didn't even say good morning. "It's like Brad is the only one he sees. That man's been feeding him a narrative for years," she said. "And Lisa's been stirring that pot since before the ink dried on the divorce papers." I rubbed my forehead. "I just don't want to lose him." "You won't," she said firmly. "Kids get blinded by shiny things. But truth has a way of showing up." I didn't know then how literal that last line would become. Saturday morning arrived with a kind of restless silence. Brad had offered to pick Ethan up, but Ethan insisted I drop him off. I tried not to read into the fact that he didn't invite me to come along. He sat in the passenger seat scrolling through his phone, fingers tapping quickly, eyes avoiding mine. "You excited?" I asked gently. "I guess. You don't sound like it." He shrugged. "It's just a tour, just a tour." But it felt like more. It felt like a fork in the road. One, he was walking without me. When we reached Brad's house, the man himself came out in an expensive coat, every hair perfectly in place, waving like he was running for office. He put a hand on Ethan's shoulder and said, loud enough for me to hear, "Ready to see what real opportunity looks like?" Something inside me burned, but before I could speak, Ethan closed the car door without a word. They both walked away, and I drove home alone, the emptiness in the car louder than any argument. I spent the afternoon trying to clean, fix, organize, doing anything that kept my hands busy. At some point, I found myself in the garage, staring at an old box of Ethan's drawings. One caught my eye, a lopsided stick figure family. Me, Ethan, live, and our old dog Tank. Underneath, in Ethan's 70-year-old handwriting, my hero, Dad. I sat on the concrete floor, the drawing shaking in my hands. What changed? When did I stop being enough? Around 4, my phone buzzed, unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something nudged me to answer. "Hello, Mr. Thompson," a calm, familiar voice said. "This is Dr. Nadia Patel." I straightened a bit. "Dr. Patel, everything all right at the hospital?" "I'm calling on a personal matter," she said. That caught me off guard. "I hope I'm not overstepping," she continued, "but I've been thinking about our conversation. And there's something your son deserves to know." My breath hitched. "What do you mean? Are you home right now?" "Yes." "Good. I'm on my way." On her way. To my house. Before I could ask anything else, she added softly, "Mark, this isn't something to discuss over the phone." And she hung up. 20 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find Dr. Patel standing on my porch holding a neatly sealed envelope. Her expression carried a seriousness I wasn't used to seeing on her. "May I come in?" she asked. Of course. We sat at the kitchen table. She placed the envelope between us like a weight she'd been carrying too long. "Before I say anything," she began, "you need to understand that I'm speaking to you not as an administrator, but as someone who has watched you sacrifice more than any father I've ever met." I swallowed. "I don't understand." She folded her hands. 3 years ago, when the hospital's East Wing flooded, you saved us. You spent nearly 18 hours straight inside that building, repairing the backup systems. You prevented the neonatal unit from losing power. I remembered the incident vaguely. It was a chaotic night, but I never saw it as heroism, just my job. You collapsed from exhaustion afterward, she continued, voice tightening. Collapsed, Mark, and when we ran your labs, we discovered you had a serious cardiac strain. We advised you to take medical leave. I blinked. Yes, but I didn't. No, you didn't. She looked directly at me. Because you told us your exact words that Ethan's tuition bill was due and you couldn't afford to lose a single paycheck. The room seemed to tilt slightly. You risked your life, she whispered, and you never told anyone. Not your sister. Not your ex-wife. Not your son. I stared at the table. My throat felt tight. Dr. Patel continued, her voice steady. Your son thinks you don't understand ambition, but you have sacrificed more for his future than he will ever comprehend unless someone tells him. She slid the envelope toward me. This is the hospital's documentation from that night. The work logs, the medical report, everything. My hands trembled as I touched it. You need to show him, she said softly. He needs to know the truth. I exhaled shakily. He won't listen to me. Then let me talk to him. My head snapped up. You'd do that. She nodded once. Mark, sometimes the truth needs a witness. In that moment, something inside me, something bruised and tired, finally lifted its head again. Hope. Real, steady hope. And I knew what had to happen next. Dr. Patel left my house just as the sky began shifting into that deep orange winter dusk, the kind that made every shadow stretch longer than it should. I stood by the window long after her car disappeared down the street, the envelope still in my hand. I'd spent years carrying the weight of my sacrifices in silence. Now that someone else finally saw them, acknowledged them, it felt strangely overwhelming. Like I'd been holding my breath for years without knowing it. Ethan and Brad were still on their college tour. I didn't expect them back until late afternoon the next day, which left me with a long, restless night to think about everything Dr. Patel said. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the documents inside the envelope, my work logs, the incident report, the medical evaluation I'd refused to share with anyone. At one point, I whispered into the quiet, would it even matter to him? The house didn't answer. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. If Ethan was going to judge me, he deserved the full truth. And if Brad and Lisa had been feeding him a distorted version of who I was, that ended now. I cleaned the house a little, made coffee, set the documents neatly on the table. Then I sat and waited. Every car driving past made my chest tighten, but it wasn't until nearly noon that I heard the familiar sound of Brad's luxury SUV pulling into the driveway. Moments later, the front door opened and Ethan walked in, duffel bag over his shoulder. Brad followed behind him, still talking. And the program director said, with your grades, you'll have no problem getting placed in the honors track. Connections matter, Ethan, remember that. Then he looked up and saw me sitting at the table. Mark, Brad said with a polite nod. Didn't expect you to be home. I gestured lightly. It's Saturday. He smirked. Right? Ethan dropped his bag and gave me a tight, almost reluctant smile. Hey, I replied. Can we talk? Just us. Ethan hesitated. Brad didn't. I'd prefer to stay, Brad said. Ethan and I. This is between me and my son, I said, my voice calm but firm. We stared at each other for a moment too long. Finally, Brad patted Ethan's arm. Call me if you need anything. Ethan nodded, and Brad stepped outside, though not without giving me one last lingering look, like he still believed he held more authority in my son's life than I did. When the door closed, Ethan leaned against the counter. Dad, if this is about the other night, I said. I didn't mean. It's not about apologies, I said. I slid the envelope across the table. It's about the truth. He frowned. What is this? Open it. He sat down, pulling out the documents one by one. I watched his face shift from confusion to curiosity to something more unsettled. What is all this? He asked. That, I said quietly, is what I was doing the night you were at your middle school science fair. The night you said you wished I'd been there. I never missed it on purpose. I collapsed at work afterward. Cardiac strain, but I kept working because your tuition bill was due the same week. His mouth parted slightly. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were 12, I said, and because I didn't want you to feel guilty for something that was never your fault. My job has always been to give you opportunities, not to burden you with how much it cost me. He kept reading, hands trembling just a little. Dr. Patel came to see me yesterday, I added. She told me what I never would have told you myself. She thinks you deserve to know. Ethan swallowed. Why now? Because lately, I said gently, you look at me like I'm something small, like I don't understand hard work or ambition. But Ethan, everything I've ever done has been for you. His eyes flickered with something painful. Dad, I didn't mean. I know you didn't, I said, but the things you hear from other people, they change the way you see me. And they're not the whole story. He looked down again, jaw tight. Brad just wants to help. I'm sure he does, I said, but helping you doesn't mean replacing me. Something shifted in his expression, uncertainty, maybe even guilt. Just then, the front door opened again. Brad walked in without knocking. Everything all right? Ethan quickly wiped his eyes. Yeah, we're just talking. Brad turned to me. Mark, I hope you're not trying to pressure him. He needs guidance, not Brad, I said evenly. This is a private conversation. He stepped closer, jaw set. Ethan lives in a competitive world. He needs strong role models, not. My patience snapped, not with anger, but clarity. Role models don't need to announce themselves, I said. They don't need to compete. And they definitely don't walk into another man's home without knocking. Ethan blinked. Brad stiffened. Before either could respond, there was another knock, sharp, firm. I opened the door, and there stood Dr. Nadia Patel. Ethan's eyes widened. Dr. Patel, what are you doing here? She stepped inside calmly, a quiet authority in her voice. I'm here because your father deserves to have someone speak the truth you've never been told, and you deserve to hear it from someone who saw it firsthand. Brad's face drained of color, and Ethan sat frozen, because the truth, his real truth, was about to be spoken out loud. Dr. Patel stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind her with a calm finality that instantly shifted the air. Even Brad, who always seemed to fill every space with his confidence, went quiet. Ethan looked between the three of us, confusion and discomfort tightening his posture. Ethan, she said gently, may I sit? He nodded slowly. Dr. Patel took the seat across from him, placing her hands neatly on the table. She carried a kind of authority that didn't need volume. It simply existed, steady and undeniable. I know this is unexpected, she began. But your father didn't ask me to come. I chose to. Ethan swallowed. Why? She glanced at me briefly before turning back to him. Because you've been given only half the picture of who your father really is. And half-truths can do more harm than lies. Brad stiffened. With all due respect, Dr. Patel, she held up a hand. Mr. Carter, I'm speaking to Ethan. The way she said it, measured, unimpressed, silenced him instantly. She continued. Ethan, I've worked with your father for nearly 20 years. In that time, I have seen employees come and go. I've seen people chase promotions, favors, recognition. Your father did none of that. He simply worked harder than anyone else, and for one reason. She pointed gently toward Ethan's chest. You. Ethan shifted, uncomfortable but listening. The night detailed in those documents, she said, tapping the envelope lightly. Your father kept the neonatal and surgical units from going dark. If they had, lives would have been lost. He worked until his body gave out. He would have died that night if the nurses hadn't found him. Ethan's eyes shot up. Dad, you never said that. I looked down, embarrassed, because it wasn't something to brag about. Dr. Patel nodded. Exactly. He didn't tell anyone, not even us. He begged us to keep the incident quiet because he was terrified it would jeopardize his overtime hours. Not because he needed the money for himself, but because he was determined to pay your school fees. Ethan blinked hard. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. She went on, her voice softening. We urged him to take a leave of absence for his health. He refused. He said, "My boy needs a future. I can rest later." My breath caught hearing my own words repeated. Ethan's eyes were glistening now. I didn't know. No, Dr. Patel said gently. You didn't, because he never wanted you to feel guilty for his sacrifices. He wanted you to simply have the life he didn't. Brad shifted again, crossing his arms. With respect, none of this changes the fact that Ethan needs strong examples in business, and Dr. Patel turned to him, her expression cool and surgical. Brad, ambition is admirable, but ambition without empathy is just ego. And ego doesn't raise a child. Even I sat straighter at that. Then she turned back to Ethan. Your father is not flashy. He doesn't care about appearances. But Ethan, he is the reason dozens of patients are alive today. He is the reason this hospital still runs during storms. He is the reason you have had every opportunity you've ever taken. She leaned forward slightly. And it's time you saw him clearly. Silence stretched through the kitchen, thicker than before, but different, not tense, heavy with understanding that had been missing for years. Ethan's voice finally broke through. Dad, why didn't you tell me any of this? Why didn't you ever make me see? I didn't want to burden you, I said quietly. You deserved a childhood, not a ledger of everything I sacrificed. I loved you enough to do it silently. A tear slid down his cheek before he could stop it. He stood from his chair, walked around the table, and sat beside me. For the first time in years, he didn't feel distant. Dad, I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry for how I talked to you, for how I looked at you. I didn't know any of it. I put a hand on his shoulder, my voice rough. You're my son. I just want you to grow, to be good, to have chances I never had. Mistakes happen. He leaned into me, just slightly but enough to soften something that had been knotted in me for months. Brad inhaled sharply. Ethan, you and I still have things to discuss. Ethan turned to him, surprising all of us. Not right now, and not without my dad. Brad blinked, caught off guard. And if we talk about my future, Ethan added, voice steady, it's going to be all three of us. You don't get to make decisions without him anymore. Brad's mouth opened, then closed. He stepped back, realizing for the first time that he wasn't the center of the room. Dr. Patel rose, giving Ethan a warm, approving nod. I think my work here is done. As she walked to the door, Ethan called softly, thank you. She smiled. Don't thank me. Thank the man who never wanted the credit. After she left, Ethan turned to me again. Dad, can we start over? I want to learn everything I didn't understand before. I exhaled shakily. We can start anytime you want. He smiled faintly. How about now? And just like that, the distance between us ears of it finally began to close. I realized then that family isn't defined by perfection or image. It's defined by truth. And the truth finally brought my son home.